Welcome back to Decoded. In this episode, I am speaking to tech entrepreneur Jules Coleman. Jules is the co-founder of Resi, an incredible digital architecture platform which feels like a real-life version of the video game Sims. This episode is a must-watch if you're a current or aspiring technology leader. So, enjoy the episode, and if you haven't already, make sure that you click the follow button now. All right, Jules, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, great to be here, Alfie.
Awesome. So you've built Resi from just an idea now into a successful tech business. So what advice would you give to others that are maybe at the earlier stages? They've just got an idea, maybe they've got an MVP, or they're just starting on that journey. What do you wish you knew back then when you first set it up? You know, what advice would you give to yourself when you were just starting the business?
Well, lucky for us, I guess, Resi was our second business, so we got to learn from our own advice from all the things we didn't do right the first time around.
Sure.
And I think, so our first business, Hassle.com, was something that we started in 2011, 2012, which it's hard to cast our minds back, but was like the word startup wasn't even necessarily a thing in London at the time. I think my own personal knowledge went as far as I'd seen Dragon's Den, and that was how businesses got started. But at the time, that was the year that the Lean Startup got released, a book by Eric Ries. Eric Ries, yeah. And I think it still holds up now. And so that's kind of where the whole idea of MVP, minimum viable product, was the simplest way that you can test that core idea that you have. I don't think that still holds up now. It's never been easier or cheaper to start up a website or use kind of the technologies that are available to kind of get something going, but really testing that people want the thing that you think they want is still can be done in a very simple and kind of cheap kind of way. And I think most people avoid it because they're afraid the answer will be that people don't want it. And you can spend an awful lot of time and money and probably, more importantly, years of your life and opportunity cost delaying that answer. And so I think, my advice to anyone at whatever, stage they might be at is how can they validate that the thing they think people want really is what they want? And
you said the way to do that is spend a weekend or a couple of weeks building something really basic, a prototype. It does the bare minimum, and then just start speaking to people, show them it, and say to them, hey, I know you're my best friend. Please don't tell me you love it. Tell me one thing you'd change about it. Absolutely.
And obviously, what form that prototype takes or kind of what is the minimum viable product version of the thing that you're testing will differ for everybody. And depending on your own skill sets, if you're an engineer, then sure, your prototype might be something digital. But if you're not, then maybe it's, something that you've cobbled together using ChatGPT and some no-code tools, or maybe it's literally analog, right? It's kind of the classic, put up a flyer and see if anybody kind of wants it kind of thing. Okay. And so I think the form of it, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, to your point, it's the feedback from real people. I know, I won't be the first person to say it, but having people part with actual cash is also the best indicator that they really would buy it. Having your mom tell you that she thinks it's great is of questionable value, I guess, is to kind of where you go. But you need to be also, cognizant and self-aware enough to phrase and the questions in an open-ended way enough that people feel safe giving you real feedback, not that you're phrasing it just looking for a compliment. Because most people are polite, most people are nice, and most people will kind of tell you what they think you want to hear versus the truth. And if you're about to, invest a significant amount of your time in it, you want the truth, not like a pleasantry.
And you actually have to ask for them to be mean or objective, right? Otherwise, they'll just sugarcoat everything.
Absolutely. I mean, it's never a personal attack mean. It's not you're stupid, you can't get this down off the ground. But what am I not seeing? I am too close to this idea. I am I'm the last person to be objective. What, with your different perspective, can you see that I can't? Can you kind of help me kind of get there? Do you think that this actually has a broader kind of appeal, or is this a really niche thing that I'm looking at that maybe me and you think is a good idea, but is anyone else going to think it is? And I think it's you've got to really be open to some of that feedback being negative, kind of in there. And I've always kind of viewed my role as a founder kind of in that you come up with a business idea, you come up with a set of assumptions, and your job then is just to validate each of those assumptions in turn. And be willing to be told that your assumption was wrong. Like, your assumption was just a guess. You're high, you're low, you're whatever. Like, if you were right, that's just by chance too. Like, and so your job is to like challenge the assumptions. And then once you then kind of get, better data, like, okay, I thought this was, X percent, but it's actually Y percent. Like, does the equation still make sense at the end? Like, is there kind of levers that you can pull that there's still a viable business here? Or does it just blow it kind of all up and it's no longer gets you excited, or it's no longer the thing that you want to work on? And then that's probably the point that you kind of like stop. But in every other scenario, you just keep learning, you just keep kind of, changing the equation and see where you get to.
I mean, you could just pivot until you get there. I mean, some of the best businesses ever, like Twitter, used to be a podcasting app.
Yeah.
I mean, Amazon just sold books. It was a bookstore, basically. So the ability to, you haven't found product market fit, fine, but you iterate, you pivot, you incrementally make it better and better and better, listening to user feedback and adapting it to what they actually would pay money for. And step by step, you can build a business that way. The hypothesis and the assumptions that you set on day one, they don't need to be correct on day 100. 100%.
And they won't be. Like, the chances that, if you imagine you made a business model in Google Sheets and it's got like 20 assumptions in it, like, and you're doing all kinds of like jiggery pokery to kind of like your business model always ends up that you're going to make millions kind of by the end of it. The chances that those 20 assumptions, like, you just guessed them out of your brain and they were all correct is almost like infinitely, it's never going to happen, right? So your job is to work out like, how that kind of does come together. And yeah, that's, that never changes. And I think, you're right. It's certainly the way we've built both of the business we did is that iterative approach. Resi or Hassle was a collection of thousands upon thousands of little tweaks and experiments and changes. And I always liken it to like watching a kid grow up, in that, like, if you're there every day, you don't notice the changes, but you look back and you're like, from baby to 4-year-old, you're like, how did that happen? And it's the same kind of thing. When you're that close to it, you don't have the objectivity to kind of see. But no company that I know of, at least, was just a true overnight success. They went into a dark room, they just kind of pulled kind of some stuff out of their head, they went out in public, and it was like totally the right thing. And even if that was the case, you'll probably find that they'll have had to adapt and change to remain relevant.
Kind of even in that dark room.
And so I think that's a stage that you never get away from. It's not like, oh, I just need to go and do this kind of, talking to customers and testing my assumptions to get started. If that's not a thing that you enjoy doing, you're going to struggle, because you have to do it throughout the lifetime of your business to kind of continue to grow and remain relevant.
So prior to Resi, you founded and sold Hassle.
Yes.
So a lot of second-time founders that I speak to, they have learned and forgot more about business than first-time founders have learned to begin with, myself probably included. What did second-time founder Jules do differently with Resi as opposed to first-time founder Jules with Hassle?
Yeah, I've always said, like, the key to success as like a founder is like a combination of stubbornness and naivety. And unfortunately, when you do second business or onwards, you've kind of lost the naivety piece. Like, that tends to be gone.
You're just really stubborn.
You're just really stubborn, which probably makes it like harder. And in some ways, we'd learned so much through the Hassle period. I learned what is a venture capitalist. Why should you raise money? Why shouldn't you raise money? What are the things you need to look out for? How do you grow a business? What happens when you start hiring people? How do you manage through managers? Or should you or shouldn't you grow internationally? And all a million different things. And they definitely informed what we did with Resi. However, I think it's easy to get smug, as we did. So we started Resi basically January 2017. January 2017 through to March 2020, we were like, those smug parents are like, oh, my baby sleeps at night. And we were like, well, we learned all of the lessons first time around. So Resi's just textbook. And it was growing textbook. Month on month, we were better than the previous month. And then we were due a dose of karma, and a global pandemic came around to smack us around the head.
That'll do it to you.
And suddenly, the lessons we learned at Hassle did not include anything about global pandemic shutting down construction in the UK. Yeah. And you realise that there's always going to be new things. There's always going to be new challenges. And that, whatever things you've learned or experiences you gained the first time around, they're definitely helpful, but they're not like a guarantee that, of future success, or that you're not going to need to kind of go again. Yeah. I think that one thing I would pull out, though, that we were a lot more conscious of the second time around the business was who we were raising money from. why we were raising money
Yeah.
and kind of the different forms of capital that are out there. I think, we look back now, and with Hassel, we started out, we went through an accelerator program. We raised some angel money. We then raised a VC round. But if I'm being honest, I don't know that we ever stopped to think, should we?
Yeah.
We just did.
Why?
Yeah, it was just like, oh, that's what people do. So
Yeah.
we should let's just take it. And I think the second time around, we were just having been through that process. We were like, is this a form of financing we want to take on? Like are we going to be able to deliver the returns that, is it the right kind of partner and all of that? And I think that was something that I don't think I could have probably just learned from a textbook. I felt like I probably needed to live through the experience a little bit. But certainly that was something we had a different lens on in the second business.
This is a quick message to tell you about Alpha. I'm so excited to announce that we have created this incredible new tool which works as your personal AI recruiter. If you are hiring software engineers in the UK, then you need to check this out. Just type in your hiring requirements and click search. It's really that simple. From here, Alpha will identify all the potential candidates on the market. It will then contact the most suitable options for you, and then you will receive the highest quality CVs who are already interested in working for your company. It's 10 times faster than a LinkedIn job advert, and it's 90% lower cost than a traditional recruitment agency. Get your free trial now at welovealpha.com or click the link in the description. I mean, the Lean Startup and many, many other startup books are brilliant and people should read them, but it's not a manual that you can follow step by step. It's not a blueprint, is it? It's a guide.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think for people where starting a business makes sense. Like, I've met some brilliant people that are infinitely smarter and more hardworking and have great ideas than myself, but it's just not for them. That kind of lack of defined blueprint, and it causes them paralysis versus kind of really energizing them. And I think so. You need to find is that the environment in which you thrive, or is it one that kind of stifles you? And it's not a character judgment. It's just for some people. Yeah. The open kind of plane where anything's possible just galvanizes them into action, and for others it just means that it's a blank page that scares the shit out of them and they never kind of move forward.
It's interesting because that chaos that you live in startup world, especially during the scale up period where you're wearing 20 different hats and you are so stretched on time and everything's breaking and you're doing things which don't scale, but you kind of are at the point where you can't do that anymore because you actually need to scale and all that. That is the opposite of your origins with IBM and PwC and these big companies. How much did you learn from Accenture and those big corporates that you can apply to the world of startups?
Yep.
Because it's completely opposite culture to what you're doing at the moment.
You're right. It's the total opposite. I would say, so I joined Accenture right out of university. I'd done a degree in economics and financial maths. It was quite boring. Yeah. Went into Accenture, and I'm so grateful that I did that, because it was this induction into the world of big business, and I got to travel the world and see all of these huge companies, massive companies from the inside. And the unifying thing is that they're all dysfunctional, but they seem to succeed in spite of themselves. But if anything, it probably gave me a bit of confidence. And it's the reason why, why do or can startups even exist? Why can a bunch of people with very little money that are just scrappy and hardworking ever compete with the incumbents? Yeah. And it's because there's a high level of dysfunction in most of these organizations. And I think that was really enlightening, kind of to see how these things work at scale. And the fact that it seems like just an incontrovertible truth that the larger a company is, the less efficient it tends to be. But it means that is what gives the opening and the gap and the opportunity for a startup to emerge and to take kind of a new kind of tact. And so I think, that period though in consulting, it gave me the bedrock in financial modeling and management and how meetings should be done and communication and kind of organizational maturity and hierarchy. Now, you don't want to have your startup that's you maybe plus two people and you're acting like you're a big corporate and you've got you're drowning in policies and procedures. But knowing kind of maybe what you're aiming for and kind of like the stages that you need to go through, I think definitely helped us have probably a more mature organization than you would expect for an organization of our size.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely helpful. But yeah, there's that kind of classic thing of, you know, coming out of corporate and going, oh, well, I'm working in a business where we do like, you know, 10 billion a quarter. How hard can a startup be?
Yeah.
And you realize pretty bloody hard. But at the same time, I think there's an awful lot of things where people just like poo-poo that there's anything good about corporate. And I think that's also not true. I think like most big businesses have probably like, they're the least bad attempt at how you manage things at that scale. And it's just that as a startup, you don't have to manage that scale. So you kind of get away without having all of kind of that stuff there. So
You made some really interesting points there. And I get what you're saying when startups shouldn't really exist because there's a company doing that or doing something similar to that, and they're doing it really well because they're successful and they're big and they might be growing. But you're right in that they become too much of a machine for the thing that previously made them money. So they'll have an idea and a bunch of really smart people will build this and get it off the ground, and they'll have help from investors and employees, and they'll create something amazing. But then when the next thing comes around in their sector, in their industry, they 99% of the time, that's not the business that jumps on that opportunity. It's somebody else. It's a fresh new business because they can then go after that opportunity and build a business from the ground up based on those fundamentals rather than the previous way it was done. Does that make sense?
100%. Like, I mean, taking two examples from the UK, from like 1990s UK.
Okay.
Like, why was HMV not Spotify?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
they were, that's where everyone went to get their music.
Yeah.
And they were like, nah, CDs, they're like, people are going to still buy those. And that turned out to not be a great business model. I'm sure they had board meeting after board meeting where someone was like, hey guys, there's this streaming thing and it seems like it's really something. And the kind of inertia and status quo was just too strong to change.
They fought against it.
Yeah. And like, you know, you're just like fighting a losing battle. Like, why was Argos not Amazon? Like, you know, Argos was like Amazon in a book that you used to bring to your house.
Yeah.
And like, sure, they have like e-commerce and stuff now, but they don't have like the dominant position kind of like in that space. And like, I'm sure there's like loads more of examples. Like, again, you look at like how many, I remember growing up and going to the shopping centre in Ireland and there'd be like loads of travel agents. Like none of them really transitioned online. It's like, I book now on booking.com or whatever, you know? So I think, yeah, it's, when you have something to lose and like these are, you know, big companies that are looking back at like 10, 20, maybe 30 years of like consistent earnings and growth and a model and a paradigm of how the world works. And it's just, it seems too risky to bet it all on this future change. But like everything's always changing. And I think that's why, oftentimes like the dominant player just isn't the one that capitalizes on the opportunity. But even where it doesn't change maybe quite so much, I feel like small scrappy startups that spot like a niche or like, you know, a different like consumer offering or something can, despite having a tiny fraction, if at all, a marketing budget and like a tiny fraction of the team, can still put something out in the world and find kind of their niche and kind of then use that and leverage it and kind of grow. Yeah. But if they're lucky enough to be as successful as that big incumbent, I'm sure in 30 years' time, they'll be prone to the exact same failings. Yeah. It'll happen to them too.
Yeah, and finding that niche, or even finding a niche within a niche within a niche is like the holy grail to start something quickly and test it and get it up and running. Just before this podcast, I was scheduling a few things on Calendly, and I thought, why isn't there a Calendly for personal trainers? Why isn't there a Calendly product specifically designed for podcast studios? And those are each multi-million-pound businesses that are just a feature of an existing business, but done better and more effectively than the large incumbent is currently doing so.
Yeah, and totally. And I think, you know, the thing I'd say there, though, is, and you're right, like each of those industries, like, it's huge globally, I'm sure. But they're probably not like Silicon Valley VC backable. Yeah. Now, that does not mean that someone could not or like should not build a great business where they have a great, like, you know, when we were starting kind of Hassel kind of, so like 10, 12 years ago, there was this like, the word like lifestyle business and stuff was thrown around like it was a derogatory term.
Sure.
Like it was like people that like weren't really in it. Okay. Like I think that's like ridiculous. Like now, like looking at there's businesses that can and should exist in the world that will make millions, maybe in tens of millions each year. Now that isn't compatible with true venture capital in the kind of Silicon Valley mindset, but it doesn't mean that they're not great businesses and like they couldn't exist out there and the people that own them couldn't have a really, really nice kind of like kind of income kind of off them. But it is, just then matching up what you want to do with the world, with then kind of the funding and kind of the outcomes that your investors might be expecting kind of from that.
Yeah, that's part of the problem with VC. Like, if your business doesn't 100x, it won't make enough of a return for the investor to pay back for all the losses in the portfolio. So it's just their business model, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
yeah. They're a hit business, they're a blockbuster.
Many different ways to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And, that's not to say that venture capital is bad or anything.
Yeah.
Like, we have venture capital investors in our current business. Yeah. Although I believe the kind of funds that we now work with, they're more closely aligned with kind of the industry that we're in, the sector we're in, and the growth aspirations that we have. And it's not that we're unambitious. We are. But, we're not about to go global to like 170 countries in the next year and do something. And it's like, we would be the wrong business for them to back if that's what they were expecting kind of from us.
Yeah, makes sense. So I interviewed Nick Jules on my podcast a couple of episodes ago, and we talked about how Resi is like a real life version of the video game Sims.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but I think that is a good way of describing it. For people that are kind of unaware of Resi, how would you describe it to a stranger in like 30 seconds?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably good that like too many hours of my teenage years spent playing The Sims might have actually come to something. But and what Nick's referring to there is like the house building aspect of it.
Sure.
So Resi came about in 2016. We just sold Hassel the previous year. Myself and Alex, I was buying a house in South London. She was looking to renovate hers. And we were both basically just really underwhelmed by the consumer offering in the architectural space. And architects, it's kind of a weird industry in that, like, if you vox popped anyone on the street, like, what's an architect? They'll know. But ask them to name a brand or like someone famous, and they'd be like, maybe they say like Norman Foster or like Zaha Hadid, but like, not going to be doing your kind of like semi-detached house in Croydon. And it's just a strange industry that no consumer brand had really kind of penetrated. And for us, it was an idea that we were like, could we bring, technology to bear and a consumer-oriented offering kind of to an industry that just feels like kind of it's full of like jargon and middlemen and people that are trying to exploit the fact that you've probably never done this before, and like, it's really expensive and it's your house, so you're like super precious about it. And what would that look like and do? And so we started like really simply just offering what we call concept design packages then for architectural concept design. So people were like, I have this house, I'm wondering, could I extend it in some way? If I did, what would that cost? What value would I add? What would it look like? And then we basically were led by our customers in a kind of and that was our MVP, effectively, kind of tying it back. And we started selling that in 2017, and we were just led by those customers. And then we started selling, proper kind of like detailed architectural drawings for those people that want to go ahead, and then helping them find a builder or finance or the different suppliers they need. And now, kind of sitting here kind of 7 years later, we're the largest residential architect in the UK. We submit more planning applications than anyone else. We have both, that architectural side of our business, but then a marketplace kind of element too. And we're just kind of getting going, but like we're already kind of proving that, you can take an old fuddy-duddy kind of industry that's kind of been avoidant of technology, drag it a little bit into the 21st century and have some interesting things happen.
Cool. And that goes perfectly to what we were speaking about a moment ago in that, to disrupt and to change and to transform and to revolutionize a sector, you just need a fresh pair of eyes that hasn't been on that problem the old way, but that can attack it from the new way. And you're doing that by, I guess, 3D modeling technology.
Because one of the things, we didn't have the 3D, the more kind of like interesting kind of like technological elements when we started first. But our kind of core thesis, and that hasn't changed, is that one of the things that has held the architectural industry back is the fact that it's totally fragmented. Yeah. Like, everyone sits in practices that are like 3 or fewer architects.
And that means name a single one. I don't know.
Yeah, because they're not brand names. Like, it's the local like high street architect. They do good work. Like, the quality's high. Like, the customers are generally happy. But it means because it's totally fragmented, there's been no investment in R&D. Like, the way that most architects, local architects will design your house would have been the same in 1970 or now. Maybe with the addition of like a 2D CAD drawing kind of package. But just there's, when you're only doing maybe 10 projects a year, there's no business case for you to invest in like technology. But we thought if we kind of build for scale, and for the everyday homeowner, we're just looking for normal, like obviously people that are lucky enough to own their own home in the UK and then be in a position to do a project to it are, a relatively rarefied group. But when we're talking in that group, we're really looking at kind of the everyday kind of homeowner. And if we can build something that becomes like the rails of the industry there, what can you do that's interesting? And for us now, that's things like building this, Sims for your project. So you as a customer can like design and feel control yourself of like what that kind of will look like. It means, brokering partnerships across the industry that mean that, you're only going to ever do maybe one of these projects to that one house that you own, but you can get the economies of scale that Resi can get because we're kind of doing the whole market. And that's, kind of to your point like earlier on, like businesses do change and evolve and iterate, but, it can be helpful to have a kind of central thesis, I guess, that you're kind of trying to do all of that iteration within. And for us, it was like, how can we make the experience better for consumers if you kind of bring technology and scale and kind of a consumer focus to this industry? And like, we can change our products, we can look and, experiment and test in like all kinds of things, but like all within that kind of overarching kind of framework.
Okay. So I moved into my apartment almost 2 years ago, and it was a new build. So as part of the process, I got to do a VR headset conceptually showing me what it would look like. And it was incredible. I got to walk around it. I got to see all the dimensions. I got to see how it would be all set up, and then took the headset off and it's just rubble everywhere. But went back a couple of months later and it's all ready, all good to go. And I thought it was such a cool innovation in the building and architect space. I know you're not a VR company, but do you see virtual reality playing a big role in the future of construction?
Possibly. It makes me violently ill the second I put on a headset. So probably not led by me, or at least I won't be able to do any testing of it. I think, so a lot of the technology that we already work with has a kind of a loose compatibility with kind of VR headsets. Yeah. I think my personal guess on kind of like the future of this is that augmented reality is probably the more likely kind of destination than kind of full kind of VR. Yeah. Obviously like with like Apple kind of like, where you can kind of almost change kind of like how kind of augmented / kind of closed off you are to the world. But yeah, I think bringing these things to life for people and kind of being able to help people imagine what their own personal space will look like, rather than kind of, looking off a catalogue or something, but it's like really coming to life. I think definitely it's the direction kind of travel for the industry. I still struggle to imagine a world in which everyone's like plugged into their own VR headsets, kind of like full time. But that's more of my own personal technological kind of beliefs. But we can see these technologies being deployed in the commercial kind of space. But yeah, as of yet, we're probably at the bleeding edge in the UK, and it's stuff that's only sort of now coming to kind of prime time and kind of being ready for kind of consumer adoption.
But if you look at like the history of innovation when it comes to these sort of things, it started with web, and then it went mobile, and now it's watches, and now it will be on your face with maybe not big VR glasses. I'm with you. I think there's a time and a place for that, and I think walking around a house with a huge thing strapped on your head is unlikely. It's probably going to be more like a pair of glasses. Yeah. And then with AR, I don't know if you could fit VR into these, but AR certainly. I could have Google Maps with arrows showing me where to walk. I could have the time. I could have little notifications coming up. Maybe not watching a Netflix movie whilst I'm speaking to you. That would be quite distracting and a bit over the top. But yeah, I think AR will be the stepping stone into VR, because once people are comfortable with having a notification appear, they'll be much more comfortable putting something on to watch a movie for a couple of hours. But you're right, there's a time and the place. I don't think that time and the place will be touring a building. I think that'll be an AR application, whereas watching a movie as a VR application, right? Yeah,
totally. And, it may even be, the VR, in the scenario that you had it kind of made sense, right? Like, I guess it's a one-time thing, it's like it's truly immersive, immersing yourself in this space. It makes sense. I guess like building consumer software, though, we're not building for a world at the moment where we're expecting consumers to have that at home for themselves.
Sure.
So, I think as a place, if we had a physical center, and we could control the experience, then I think we could build for something a little bit different. But, we've always, from Hassle days, kind of through to now, we've always tried to build for the technology that we believe the consumers have. Like when we first started Hassle, and this sounds like it's the dark ages, but it was only 2012, like we built, because that was a marketplace for people finding cleaners.
Yeah.
And at the time, so again, the iPhone had only come out like a year and a half beforehand, and like not everyone had a smartphone. We built all of that based on like the cleaners would only have access to like SMS technology. Right?
Wow.
Now that was very quick. Like the world changed very quickly, and what actually happened was that the cleaner's only computing device was a smartphone and kind of things changed. But I think you always have to be kind of like cognizant of like, what is the, the technical savviness and like access to equipment that, your end user are going to have. Like, even we have that in our office right now. We try and design everything that we're designing for the web and for desktop, like not on super high end, like Mac like screens, because that's not what like our like customers are using in their homes. And you kind of need to kind of make sure you're kind of matching kind of for that.
I love the story of when Google Chrome was built. The leadership team that put it together, they would test it on computers that were like 5-10 years old, and they needed it to work on everything.
Yeah.
And it's such a great way to run your business, because if you're just focused on, hey, let's make this work for the most cutting edge platform that's out there, 99% of the world are not working on the most cutting edge platform. So your product won't work on them.
Yeah. And I think it's just, it's just a form of empathy, right? And then that should like needs to go through like your entire product like that. I think it's hard unless you happen to be building a business for people that are exactly like you, and there's a really lots of people exactly like you. You need to be able to put yourself into other people's shoes and like kind of the the psychological kind of like position they're in, or like literally like the physical location they're in, and the the devices that they're using, like, and consuming your content, because you're building it in one scenario, in one context and setting, and it's been consumed in another. And kind of trying to build that kind of like, empathy kind of skill that you can kind of imagine kind of that, and then kind of building for it. It's amazing how many people kind of seem to miss that step, I guess, kind of in the process.
Okay. So looking into the future a little bit, Jules, there's so much happening right now with Gen AI to Web3, and the whole world is kind of going into a really interesting, chaotic direction for good and bad. But are there any technologies at the moment which really excite you, which you think are going to have a big impact on the future ahead?
Yeah, I mean, like in a Resi specific kind of setting, I guess there's a few different things that we're looking at. So of course you can't move for like looking at like LLMs or like an AI. I think we're definitely, again, because of the consumer group that we're looking at, which are, they're homeowners, they're people that, they're typically in their 30s plus, let's say 30s to 60s in the UK. Again, they're not looking to be guinea pigs on us, like kind of trying kind of stuff out. But we'd be totally remiss as like a technology driven company not to be exploring where and when these things fit in kind of to our process. And whether that's even just tools to help leverage our teams internally to be more productive. I often use like the analogy with, say, ChatGPT. If I give ChatGPT an email, let's say a marketing email that we have, and I say, hey, make it more concise, whatever. I can read it. I can go like, oh, that feels a bit awkward. Like, that's not really British kind of English. Like, that's going to come off, and I can tweak whatever. Like, it can be helpful, and then I can tweak a little bit further. If I say, translate this email into Chinese, a language that I do not read, speak, or have any understanding of, I'm unable to kind of verify the accuracy or the kind of quality that's coming out the other side. And so I think in its current incarnation, that particular technology, I think, is great at really leveraging people that already have some domain expertise and know how to use it and kind of like make them kind of faster. And so for us then, it probably has a more practical implementation right now internally. We have a team of architects that know their stuff, but it'd be really nice to be able to query, like, what does the UK national planning kind of guidelines like say about this? And then they can apply their own kind of nows kind of on top of it. Versus building a chatbot for consumers who might get like information back that doesn't actually really make sense, but they don't have the knowledge to know that it doesn't make sense. I think on some of the slightly deeper kind of tech things, for us in particular, like machine vision and stuff is super interesting. As we look at kind of floor plans and look at how we can help customers, say that are just at the buying stage of the journey, really understand like what is the latent potential kind of like in properties that they're looking at. And then, I think we're going further and deeper into 3D. How can we push the boundaries of what's possible there? And again, while keeping in mind the end user that will be using this. None of our customers are going to, write a 5-star review on Trustpilot because they really like, how we've used 3JS or something to do with 3D. But if we can make a great experience for them that help them understand what their ground floor extension would be, we're like opening up their kitchen to the garden and they got real cost certainty and that was delivered using the tool, then that's important for them. And so I think always like we're trying to remember why we're using kind of some of these technologies, and is it really going to help the end user and make kind of the experience kind of better?
You've gone back to that point a couple of times during the podcast. You keep saying experience, and I think that's so true, because people just get fascinated on, hey, it's got AI in it, or oh, hey, look, this is built with React and not Angular or whatever. And I know you're Ruby developer.
Yeah, we're Ruby.
Yeah, you're Ruby. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hey, it's I've had DHH on my podcast, and I was speaking to him the other day, and every mention that I speak to him, it's hey, look, there's this new version of Ruby, this new update on Rails has happened, and that's cool. That's cool. But ultimately, is a customer experience satisfied? Are they happy? Do they love your product? Do they tell their friends about it?
Yeah.
What do you think? Because you've built 2 businesses now, and both of them have delighted customers. What do you think makes a delighted customer? How do you wow them?
I think when reality exceeds expectations is ultimately it, right? And that's not just about kind of downplaying what the expectations are going to be, but not overselling a dream. And it's one of the things with Resi that we try and do. We don't always get it right, but extending your home is a stressful thing to do. People don't do it because they think it'll be fun. Yes. They do it because they need the utility of what they're going to have at the end of it. And we try, one of the things that we've always tried kind of through the process is to be plain speaking and not sugarcoat things all the way through and pretend that, Resi's some magician that's going to make it all super seamless and no one's ever going to have a day of stress in their life. Yeah. However, we are and this feels really kind of emergency tribe, hopefully the trusted advisor or partner that's done it 1,000 times before, actually 10,000 times before, and can help you through that journey. And you're not kind of on your own kind of through there. And I think so being reasonable and realistic with the expectations that you're setting, not over selling yourself, and then trying your best to just over deliver on that, And again, one of the things that I always hope people take from their interactions with Resi is that we're technology is a big part of what we do. But I think they'll remember Resi a lot more for the humans they interact with, and the fact that the humans felt human and not they were reading off a script, and that they felt like there was a real person that cared that this was a super stressful thing that they're doing and their house was at stake and kind of going through. And I think we try to do that in our whole company. That idea of remembering that we're human, is at the core of it. I mentioned sometimes, my last job before I started Hassel, our first business, I'd moved from Accenture. I was at PwC, and I was working as a management consultant there. And I had a really good time. PwC are a great company, but I'll still remember having to ring up the HR department and refer to myself by an 8-digit code. And I'm like, I'm a human with a name. And resolving that, any company that we'd run wouldn't have that. Now, in fairness to PwC, when you have 30,000 employees in the UK alone, a system like that makes sense. But it felt very dehumanizing. And I think that's, again, the magic of startups is when you get the intersection of technology and really good humans and what that can do for customers. Yeah.
No, I did 5 years with a huge corporate, and I can remember exactly the same thing. I remember actually calling up on my final day of 5 years to hand over some stuff, and the HR person was like, who is this?
Exactly.
I think, okay, I get it now. Yeah, but startups are a different beast, aren't they? It's a very, very different type of world. You have different risk, different rewards, but very different lifestyle, I guess, to the big corporate. Cool. For people that have enjoyed this, Jules, if they want to find out more about Resi, where should they go?
I mean, resi.co.uk, always a good start. You can play around with that 3D Sims for adults. Cool. we do not patch it, but maybe we should. Yeah. Obviously, we're on all the socials. I'm not on social media really at all. So
you're on LinkedIn though?
Oh, I hate LinkedIn.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't applied for a job in a very long time, but LinkedIn gives me a level of cringe that I struggle with. I'm sure Resi is, but I haven't reviewed our content of late. But yeah, no, of course, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, another thing I've never seen in my life, and on there. But yeah, Resi.co.uk, we've got, and one of the things that we've done, if anyone is kind of in the process of this, we believe in sharing content and things for free, and making as much available as possible, because in our business, you're not going to strong arm someone into doing an extension if they weren't already kind of considering kind of doing it. So it's, we just want to be there at the right time whenever kind of someone gets to that point. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, Jules, thank you.
Amazing. Thanks.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. I really, really appreciate it. I hope it brought you some value. And if you haven't already, please remember to click subscribe or follow wherever you're watching this podcast now.